In the year 830 AD, Maya scribes carved a date into stone that would chill you to the bone. December 21st, 2012. They predicted the end of the world, and then, mysteriously, their own civilization vanished into the jungle, leaving behind empty cities and unanswered questions that still haunt archaeologists today. Welcome back to Eerie and Weird, where history's mysteries come to light. I'm about to tell you the spine-tingling story of how an ancient civilization not only foresaw global catastrophe over 1,000 years in the future, but seemed to orchestrate their own disappearance as if they knew something we don't. Picture this. You're standing in the dense rainforests of Guatemala, surrounded by towering pyramids covered in centuries of vegetation. The air is thick with humidity and the weight of secrets. These aren't just ruins. They're the remnants of one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history, a people who could calculate the movements of planets with terrifying accuracy. The Maya didn't just build monuments. They built mathematical time machines. Their long-count calendar was so precise, it could predict solar eclipses thousands of years into the future. But here's where it gets eerie. Embedded within their stone monuments was a countdown to December 21st, 2012, a date they marked as the end of the current world cycle. When 2012 arrived, millions of people around the globe held their breath. Doomsday preppers stockpiled supplies. Movies were made. The world watched and waited. But nothing happened. Or did it? The Maya knew something we're only beginning to understand. They weren't predicting the end of the world. They were predicting the end of their world. And the most chilling part? They were off by only 1,182 years. Between 800 and 900 AD, something impossible happened. Cities that housed millions of people were abandoned almost overnight. Not destroyed by war, not ravaged by plague, simply left behind. Imagine Times Square suddenly empty, with half-eaten meals still on tables and children's toys scattered in the streets. This wasn't gradual decline. This was systematic evacuation on a scale that defies explanation. In Tikal, Guatemala's largest Maya city, the population dropped from 100,000 to virtually zero in less than a century. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was carved in 909 AD, and then silence. But here's what makes your skin crawl. The Maya didn't just abandon their cities randomly. They seemed to follow a pattern, as if following some predetermined plan. The northern cities emptied first, then the southern ones, moving in a wave that swept across the entire Maya world, like a slow-motion tsunami of abandonment. Archaeological evidence suggests they didn't flee in panic. Tools were carefully stored. Sacred objects were deliberately buried. It's as if they knew they weren't coming back, as if they were following a script written in the stars themselves. What did they know that we don't? What could make an entire civilization simply disappear? Drop a comment below if you think the Maya were following a cosmic countdown, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. The Maya left us clues, but they're written in a code we're still trying to crack. Their monuments tell stories of kings and gods, but buried within the dates and names are warnings that make your blood run cold. At Quirigua, Guatemala, stone monuments called stelae record a series of cosmic events, solar eclipses, planetary alignments, and something they called the darkening of the sky. These weren't just astronomical observations. They were countdown markers to catastrophe. But here's the truly unsettling part. Modern climate data reveals that the Maya collapse coincided with the worst drought in 1,000 years. Tree ring data shows rainfall dropped by 70% across the Maya region. The question isn't whether they knew this was coming. The question is how they knew. Their agricultural terraces and water management systems could have sustained them through normal droughts. These weren't primitive people. They were master engineers who had survived climate challenges for centuries. So why did they abandon everything just when they needed their infrastructure most? Some researchers believe the Maya elite possessed knowledge that went beyond conventional astronomy. They may have understood climate cycles that we're only now beginning to comprehend. Their prophecies weren't supernatural. They were scientific predictions based on patterns they'd observed for millennia. The stone carvings at Palenque speak of the return of the darkness and the time when the rain lords sleep. These aren't metaphors. They're meteorological forecasts carved in stone, warnings left for future generations who might be smart enough to decode them. What do you think? Were the Maya ancient climate scientists or something even more mysterious? Let me know in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed because this story gets even stranger. The Maya weren't just calendar makers. They were cosmic archaeologists, digging through time itself to uncover patterns that repeat across centuries. Their understanding of astronomy was so advanced that they could predict the position of Venus for thousands of years into the future with an accuracy that rivals modern computers. But their most disturbing discovery was what they called the Great Cycle, a 5,125-year period that they believed represented the lifespan of the current world. According to their calculations, our current cycle began on August 11th, 3114 BC, and was destined to end on December 21st, 2012. Here's where it gets genuinely frightening. The Maya weren't the only ancient civilization tracking this cycle. The Aztecs had their own version called the Five Suns, each representing a world that had been destroyed and reborn. The Hindu concept of yugas describes similar cycles of cosmic time. It's as if multiple civilizations independently discovered the same terrifying truth about the nature of existence. The Maya believed that at the end of each great cycle, the world would be refreshed, destroyed, and recreated. They saw themselves as living through the fourth world, with the fifth world beginning in 2012. But unlike other civilizations that feared these transitions, the Maya seemed to embrace them. Their disappearance wasn't random, it was timed. They vanished just as they calculated the old world was ending, as if they chose to step aside and make room for whatever was coming next. The question that haunts researchers is, where did they go? Recent discoveries in the deepest caves of the Yucatan Peninsula have revealed Maya artifacts dating to the time of the collapse, suggesting some groups may have literally gone underground. Were they waiting, hiding, preparing for the return of the new cycle? This is getting seriously creepy. Drop a comment if you think the Maya found a way to survive their own prophecy, and smash that subscribe button, because we're about to reveal the most chilling discovery of all. Here's what will keep you awake at night. The Maya disappearance might not be over. In 2012, when their predicted world-end date arrived, something did happen. Just not what anyone expected. Climate scientists now recognize 2012 as a tipping point in global climate change. Arctic ice began melting at unprecedented rates. Weather patterns shifted dramatically. The very year the Maya predicted world transformation, our planet began experiencing changes that matched their ancient descriptions of world renewal. But the truly eerie part? Maya communities that survived in remote areas began emerging from isolation around 2012. After centuries of avoiding contact with the outside world, they started sharing knowledge that had been kept secret for generations. It's as if some invisible timer had gone off, releasing them from an ancient pact of silence. Modern Maya spiritual leaders speak of 2012 not as an ending, but as a time of awakening. They describe their ancestors' disappearance not as abandonment, but as a strategic withdrawal, a way of preserving their knowledge for the moment when the world would need it most. Archaeological teams are now discovering Maya sites that were deliberately sealed and left with instructions for future generations. These time capsules contain sophisticated knowledge about sustainable agriculture, water management, and astronomical prediction that could help us navigate our current climate crisis. The Maya didn't predict the end of the world in 2012. They predicted the end of the old world and the beginning of a new one. A world where their descendants would emerge from the shadows to share the wisdom their ancestors preserved through the darkness. The Maya collapse isn't just an ancient mystery, it's a prophecy still unfolding. They didn't vanish, they transformed, leaving behind a puzzle that we're only now beginning to solve. Their empty cities weren't signs of failure, but markers of transition, guideposts for a civilization that saw further into the future than we ever imagined possible. The next time you hear about climate change, remember the Maya. They faced the same challenges we're facing now, but they had something we don't: 1,000 years of advance warning. The question isn't whether they survived their own prophecy, but whether we'll be wise enough to learn from their example. The jungle keeps its secrets, but every year archaeologists uncover new pieces of the puzzle. The Maya story isn't over, it's just beginning. What do you think happened to the Maya? Are they still out there waiting for the right moment to return? Share your theories in the comments below. Hit subscribe if you want to dive deeper into history's greatest mysteries, and ring that notification bell because next week we're exploring another civilization that saw the future and tried to warn us about it. Until then, keep questioning everything. The truth is always stranger than fiction.
Imagine this. You're hiking through the remote canyons of Mesa Verde, Colorado, when suddenly you stumble upon something extraordinary. Towering cliff dwellings, perfectly preserved after 700 years. Their windows like empty eyes staring back at you. But here's the chilling part. These magnificent cities were abandoned in a single generation, left behind as if their inhabitants simply vanished. Welcome back to Eerie and Weird, where we explore history's greatest mysteries. Today, we're diving into one of archaeology's most puzzling enigmas. What happened to the ancestral Puebloans, and why did an entire civilization disappear almost overnight? But before we uncover this 800-year-old mystery, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what we discover today. And stick around until the end, because I'll reveal the most shocking theory about their disappearance that will completely change how you see this ancient mystery. To understand this mysterious disappearance, we first need to meet the people who vanished. The ancestral Puebloans, once called the Anasazi, though this Navajo term meaning ancient enemies has fallen out of favor, were one of North America's most sophisticated prehistoric civilizations. For over 1,300 years, from roughly 100 to 1300 CE, these remarkable people called the Four Corners region of the American Southwest their home. Picture this vast landscape, the rugged terrain where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet today. It was here, in this seemingly harsh and unforgiving environment, that the ancestral Puebloans built something extraordinary. These weren't nomadic hunter-gatherers scraping by in the desert. No, the ancestral Puebloans were master architects, skilled farmers, and sophisticated astronomers. They constructed elaborate irrigation systems that brought life to arid lands, grew corn, beans, and squash in quantities that could feed thousands, and built structures so advanced that they still leave modern engineers scratching their heads. Their pottery was exquisite, black-on-white geometric designs that are considered among the finest in North American prehistory. They wove baskets so tightly they could hold water, created turquoise jewelry that was traded across vast distances, and developed a complex social system that governed their communities. But it was their architecture that truly set them apart. Starting around 1050 CE, during what archaeologists call the Pueblo II period, they began an unprecedented construction boom. They built great houses, massive stone structures rising 4 stories high, containing hundreds of rooms and requiring millions of precisely cut sandstone blocks. Chaco Canyon in New Mexico became their cultural center, a place so magnificent it defies explanation. Pueblo Bonito, the largest structure, contained over 600 rooms and stood 4 stories tall. But here's what's truly mind-blowing. These buildings were aligned with astronomical phenomena, solar and lunar cycles that the ancestral Puebloans tracked with incredible precision. And then there were the cliff dwellings. Starting around 1150 CE, they began constructing entire cities within the natural alcoves of canyon walls. Mesa Verde's Cliff Palace housed over 150 people in a space that seems impossible to build, let alone inhabit. But why am I telling you all this? Because understanding the sophistication and success of ancestral Puebloan civilization makes their sudden disappearance even more mysterious. This wasn't a struggling society on the brink of collapse. This was a thriving civilization at its peak. So what could cause such a successful people to abandon everything they had built? Here's where our story takes a dramatic turn. Around 1300 CE, something unprecedented happened. The ancestral Puebloans began abandoning their magnificent cities, their carefully tended fields, and their sacred sites. But this wasn't a gradual decline. Archaeological evidence suggests this exodus happened within a single generation, possibly within just a few decades. Imagine walking through Chaco Canyon in 1250 CE. You'd see bustling communities, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing in the plazas, and artisans crafting pottery and jewelry. Fast forward just 50 years to 1300 CE, and you'd find silence. Empty buildings, abandoned tools, a ghost town on a massive scale. The numbers are staggering. Tens of thousands of people, possibly over 100,000, simply packed up and left. They abandoned not just individual homes, but entire regions. The Four Corners area, which had been continuously occupied for over a millennium, became a virtual no-man's land. But here's what makes this even more mysterious. They left behind virtually everything. Pottery vessels sitting where they were last used. Tools abandoned in mid-construction. Food storage areas still containing corn and beans. It's as if they expected to return, but never did. Tree-ring dating has given us precise timelines for this abandonment, and the pattern is clear across the entire region. Mesa Verde, abandoned by 1300 CE. Chaco Canyon, largely empty by 1250 CE. Canyon de Chelly, evacuated around the same time. It's like watching dominoes fall across the landscape. Archaeological teams have found houses with fires still in the hearths, covered by centuries of dust. Sandals left at doorways. Personal possessions scattered as if their owners left in haste. Some sites show evidence of careful abandonment. Rooms sealed and valuable items removed, while others suggest hasty departures. But where did they go? This massive population didn't simply vanish into thin air. The answer to that question reveals just how remarkable this migration truly was. The ancestral Puebloans moved south and east, joining and establishing new communities along the Rio Grande River in New Mexico and in Arizona's Hopi Mesas. Their descendants became the modern Pueblo peoples, the Hopi, Acoma, Santa Clara, San Ildefonso, and many others. These communities maintain oral traditions that speak of long journeys from the north, of leaving the homes of their ancestors for new lands. But knowing where they went doesn't answer the bigger question. Why? What could force such a successful civilization to abandon everything and start over? Now, if you're finding this mystery as fascinating as I am, do me a favor and hit that like button. And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because we're about to explore the theories that attempt to explain this incredible disappearance, and some of them will shock you. The first and most widely accepted theory centers on climate change, but not the kind you might think. Between 1276 and 1299 CE, the American Southwest experienced what researchers call the Great Drought, one of the most severe and prolonged droughts in the region's recorded history. Tree-ring analysis from throughout the Four Corners region tells a story of increasingly desperate conditions. Annual precipitation dropped to levels that made agriculture nearly impossible. The sophisticated farming systems that had supported dense populations for centuries began to fail. Think about this from the perspective of an ancestral Puebloan farmer in 1280 CE. Your ancestors had successfully grown crops in this land for over 1,000 years. Your irrigation systems were marvels of engineering. Your knowledge of soil, weather, and agricultural cycles was passed down through generations. But now, year after year, the rains don't come. Your carefully tended fields produce smaller and smaller harvests. Your water sources dry up. But drought alone doesn't explain the complete abandonment. These people had survived droughts before, some lasting decades. They had developed sophisticated water conservation techniques, drought-resistant crop varieties, and storage systems designed to last through lean years. This is where environmental degradation enters the picture. By 1200 CE, the ancestral Puebloans had been intensively farming the same lands for centuries. Soil erosion was becoming a serious problem. Deforestation from construction and fuel needs had altered local ecosystems. Some researchers believe they had literally outgrown the carrying capacity of their environment. Dr. Timothy Kohler's research at Washington State University suggests that population growth had pushed ancestral Puebloan society to the breaking point. Using sophisticated computer models, his team calculated that by 1280 CE, the population may have exceeded what the land could sustainably support even in good years. Add climate change to this environmental stress, and you have a perfect storm. But wait, there's more to this story that makes it even more complex. Recent research has revealed that the Great Drought wasn't uniform across the region. Some areas received more rainfall than others. Some river valleys maintained reliable water sources. So why didn't the ancestral Puebloans simply move to these better-watered areas within their traditional homeland? This is where we encounter one of the most intriguing aspects of the abandonment. It appears to have been coordinated and widespread, not the gradual migration you'd expect from environmental pressure alone. Which brings us to our next theory, one that suggests something far more dramatic than climate change was at work. But before we dive into that darker possibility, let me ask you this. What do you think could cause an entire civilization to abandon their homeland? Drop your theories in the comments below. I read every single one, and some of the most insightful observations come from you, our viewers. What if the ancestral Puebloans didn't leave voluntarily? What if they were forced out by something far more immediate and terrifying than drought? Warfare and violence on a scale that made their homeland uninhabitable. This theory emerged from some of archaeology's most disturbing discoveries. In the 1990s, excavations at several ancestral Puebloan sites uncovered evidence that challenged the peaceful image these people had maintained for decades. What archaeologists found was shocking. Clear signs of warfare, massacre, and even cannibalism. At Castle Rock Pueblo in Colorado, researchers discovered the remains of 41 individuals who had died violently around 1280 CE. The evidence was unmistakable: cut marks on bones, burning, and disarticulation that suggested not just death, but systematic dismemberment. Similar evidence was found at Cowboy Wash, Sand Canyon Pueblo, and other sites throughout the region. But this wasn't just isolated violence. The pattern of fortified settlements tells a story of increasing fear and militarization. Starting around 1150 CE, about 150 years before the abandonment, ancestral Puebloan communities began building in increasingly defensive positions. Cliff dwellings weren't just architectural marvels, they were fortresses. Consider Mesa Verde's cliff dwellings from this perspective. These weren't built in alcoves for protection from the weather. They were built there because they were nearly impossible to attack. The only access was through narrow, easily defended passages. The location provided clear views of approaching enemies and multiple escape routes through the canyon system. Archaeologist Lawrence Keeley's research suggests that warfare became endemic in the late ancestral Puebloan period. Tower structures that were once thought to be ceremonial or astronomical are now interpreted as watchtowers. Defensive walls began appearing around settlements. Tool assemblages show increasing numbers of weapons. But who were they fighting? The evidence suggests it wasn't external invaders, but warfare between ancestral Puebloan groups themselves. Climate stress and resource scarcity had apparently triggered a breakdown in social order. Competition for dwindling farmland and water sources led to raiding, retaliation, and escalating cycles of violence. Some researchers propose that this internal warfare became so destructive that it made entire regions uninhabitable. Social networks that had maintained peace and trade for centuries collapsed. Trust between communities evaporated. The very social structures that had allowed ancestral Puebloan civilization to flourish began to tear it apart. Dr. Stephen LeBlanc of Harvard's Peabody Museum argues that the combination of environmental stress and warfare created a positive feedback loop. Drought led to resource competition, which led to warfare, which disrupted agricultural systems, which intensified resource scarcity, which led to more warfare. But there's a problem with the warfare theory standing alone. If violence was the primary cause of abandonment, why don't we see more evidence of wholesale slaughter? Why weren't the cliff dwellings destroyed by conquerors? Why did the migration appear so organized rather than a panicked flight? The answer might lie in a theory that combines environmental stress, warfare, and something else entirely, something that gets to the heart of what it meant to be ancestral Puebloan. And that's where our story takes perhaps its most fascinating turn. But first, I want to hear from you. Which theory do you find most convincing so far? Are you team climate change, team warfare, or do you think there's something else entirely going on here? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, make sure you're subscribed because what we're about to explore next will challenge everything you think you know about this mystery. Here's where our investigation takes a truly fascinating turn. What if the ancestral Puebloans didn't abandon their homeland because they had to, but because they chose to? What if their disappearance was actually a deliberate, religiously motivated migration based on prophecy and spiritual belief? This theory emerges from careful study of ancestral Puebloan religious practices and modern Pueblo oral traditions. The ancestral Puebloans weren't just farmers and builders. They were deeply spiritual people whose entire worldview was based on maintaining cosmic balance and harmony with the natural world. Their architecture reflects this spiritual focus. Kivas, circular, underground ceremonial chambers, were the heart of every community. These weren't just meeting places. They were sacred spaces where rituals essential to community survival were performed. Rain ceremonies, seasonal celebrations, and coming-of-age rituals all took place in these carefully constructed underground rooms. But here's what's crucial to understanding this theory. Ancestral Puebloan religion was intimately connected to place. Specific landscapes were sacred. Particular mountains, springs, and rock formations were considered the homes of spiritual beings. Their cosmology was literally rooted in the geography of the Four Corners region. Dr. Ruth Van Dyke of Binghamton University has studied the astronomical alignments of ancestral Puebloan architecture and found that they were tracking complex celestial cycles, not just solar and lunar cycles, but the movements of planets and stars over decades and centuries. This suggests a sophisticated understanding of time and prophecy. What if their astronomical observations led them to conclude that a great cycle was ending? Modern Pueblo peoples maintain oral traditions about migrations guided by spiritual prophecy. The Hopi speak of following a star to their destined homeland. Other Pueblo groups tell stories of leaving previous homes when the spirits told them it was time to move on. Some researchers believe that the environmental and social stresses of the late 1200s were interpreted through this religious lens as signs that the spiritual contract with their homeland had been broken. The drought, the warfare, the social breakdown, All of these could have been seen as evidence that the cosmic balance had been disrupted and it was time for a great migration. But there's an even more specific possibility. Archaeological evidence suggests that the traditional religious and social hierarchies that had governed ancestral Puebloan society for centuries were breaking down by 1200 CE. The great houses of Chaco Canyon appear to have lost their influence. Regional centers that had coordinated trade and ceremony were abandoned. Dr. Stephen Plogg's research indicates that the complex social networks that had integrated ancestral Puebloan communities across vast distances were collapsing. The roads that connected Chaco Canyon to outlying communities fell into disuse. The standardized pottery styles that had reflected shared cultural identity became more localized and diverse. This social fragmentation might have triggered a crisis of meaning. If the traditional ways of maintaining cosmic balance weren't working, if the ceremonies weren't bringing rain, if the social hierarchies weren't preventing violence, then perhaps it was time for a fundamental renewal. The migration south and east could have been seen as a return to origins, a spiritual rebirth. Many Pueblo creation stories speak of emergence from underground worlds and journeys to promised lands. The abandonment of the Four Corners region might have been understood as part of this sacred cycle of emergence, migration, and renewal. But here's what makes this theory particularly compelling. It explains the organized nature of the abandonment. If this was a religiously motivated migration guided by spiritual leaders and prophetic visions, it would explain why entire communities left together, why the timing was so coordinated across the region, and why they seemed to know exactly where they were going. Modern Pueblo peoples describe their ancestors' departure not as abandonment or failure, but as completion, the fulfillment of their spiritual purpose in that land and the beginning of a new chapter in their sacred journey. This gives us a completely different way of understanding the mysterious disappearance of the ancestral Puebloans. Maybe it wasn't mysterious at all. Maybe it was exactly what was supposed to happen. But before we conclude our investigation, there's one more theory we need to explore, one that combines elements of all the others and might provide the most complete explanation for this incredible historical puzzle. After examining all these theories, here's what I believe really happened to the ancestral Puebloans, and why their disappearance might not be as mysterious as we first thought. The truth is, it probably wasn't one single cause but a perfect storm of interconnected factors that created both the necessity and the opportunity for one of prehistory's greatest migrations. Picture this scenario. By 1200 CE, ancestral Puebloan civilization had reached a critical threshold. Population growth had pushed communities to the limits of what their environment could sustainably support. They had been farming the same lands intensively for centuries, and soil depletion was reducing crop yields. Deforestation for construction and fuel had altered local ecosystems. Then came the Great Drought of 1276 to 1299 CE. But this wasn't just any drought. It was the kind of extended dry period that happens once every few centuries. For a civilization already stressed by overpopulation and environmental degradation, this drought was catastrophic. As resources became scarce, the social bonds that had held ancestral Puebloan society together began to fray. Competition for farmland and water sources triggered warfare between communities that had peacefully coexisted for generations. Trust networks collapsed. Trade relationships ended. The great ceremonial centers lost their ability to coordinate regional cooperation. But here's the crucial part. The ancestral Puebloans were too sophisticated to simply collapse. They had options. Their extensive trade networks had given them detailed knowledge of other regions. They knew about the river valleys to the south and east where water was more reliable and land was available. Their astronomical observations and spiritual traditions may have provided the framework for understanding these events not as random catastrophes but as part of a cosmic cycle. The drought, the warfare, the social breakdown, all could be interpreted as signs that it was time for a great migration, a spiritual renewal. So the abandonment wasn't a panicked flight or a tragic collapse. It was a calculated decision by communities that chose adaptation over destruction. They looked at their deteriorating situation and made a collective choice to start over somewhere else. The migration was organized because it was planned. Different communities probably coordinated their departures to avoid overwhelming the regions they were moving to. They took essential knowledge, technologies, and cultural practices with them while leaving behind the physical structures that were too costly to move. What we call the mysterious disappearance of the ancestral Puebloans was actually one of prehistory's most successful adaptations to environmental and social crisis. Instead of fighting a losing battle against drought and resource depletion, they chose transformation. And it worked. The ancestral Puebloans didn't disappear. They became the modern Pueblo peoples of New Mexico and Arizona. Their descendants continue to thrive today, maintaining many of the same cultural traditions, architectural techniques, and spiritual practices that characterized their ancestors. The cliff dwellings and great houses they left behind weren't failures or tragedies. They were graduation gifts to the future, preserved examples of what human ingenuity and cooperation can accomplish. So what can we learn from the ancestral Puebloans? Their story offers profound lessons for our own time as we face our own environmental and social challenges. First, sustainability matters. The ancestral Puebloans thrived for over 1,000 years because they developed technologies and social systems adapted to their environment. But when they pushed beyond sustainable limits, when population growth and intensive agriculture exceeded the land's carrying capacity, the entire system became vulnerable to external shocks like drought. Second, social cooperation is essential for survival. The ancestral Puebloans' greatest achievements, their architecture, their agricultural systems, their trade networks, all required unprecedented levels of cooperation between communities. When social trust broke down, their ability to respond effectively to crisis was compromised. Third, adaptation is better than destruction. Faced with insurmountable challenges in their traditional homeland, the ancestral Puebloans chose transformation over collapse. They used their knowledge, skills, and social networks to create new communities in new places rather than fighting a losing battle against impossible odds. Fourth, culture is portable. The ancestral Puebloans left behind their buildings, but they took their knowledge, traditions, and identities with them. What made them who they were wasn't tied to specific places but to shared ways of understanding and organizing the world. Finally, apparent endings can actually be new beginnings. What looks like disappearance or failure from one perspective can be successful adaptation from another. The lost civilization of the ancestral Puebloans lives on in their descendants, who continue to draw strength from their ancestors' remarkable legacy of resilience and adaptation. These lessons feel particularly relevant today as we grapple with climate change, resource depletion, social fragmentation, and the challenge of building sustainable communities. The ancestral Puebloans show us that even the most successful civilizations must be prepared to adapt and transform when circumstances change. Their story reminds us that human societies are not fixed or permanent but dynamic systems that can choose how to respond to challenge and change. The choice between adaptation and collapse may be the most important decision any civilization ever makes. The mysterious disappearance of the ancestral Puebloans turns out to be not so mysterious after all. It's the story of a sophisticated civilization that faced unprecedented challenges and chose transformation over destruction. They didn't vanish, they evolved. Their empty cliff dwellings and abandoned great houses aren't monuments to failure but testaments to successful adaptation. They remind us that sometimes the most courageous choice is knowing when to let go of the past and embrace an uncertain future. The next time you visit Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon, don't just see ruins. See graduation ceremonies. See communities that chose to begin again rather than fight battles they couldn't win. See ancestors who gave their descendants the greatest gift possible. The knowledge that survival sometimes means having the wisdom to start over. What do you think? Does this change how you see the ancestral Puebloans? Do their lessons apply to our own time? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed unraveling this ancient mystery with me, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's greatest puzzles. Give this video a thumbs up if it changed how you think about the past, and share it with anyone who loves a good historical mystery. Next week, we're exploring another vanished civilization, the mysterious sea peoples who brought down the Bronze Age. Trust me, that's another story you won't want to miss. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, sometimes the greatest mysteries have the most human answers. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Picture this. The year is 1177 BCE. The most powerful empires in human history are crumbling to dust. The mighty Hittites, who once challenged Egypt itself, have vanished overnight. Cities burn from Greece to the Levant. Entire civilizations are being wiped from existence by mysterious invaders who came from the sea. Who were these phantom destroyers? Where did they come from? And how did they bring down empires that had ruled for centuries with nothing but bronze weapons and wooden ships? Today, we're diving into one of history's greatest mysteries, the Sea Peoples who may have triggered the first dark age in recorded history. But before we uncover the truth behind these ancient raiders, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to discover will completely change how you see the ancient world. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why some historians believe the Sea Peoples were the ancient world's equivalent of a zombie apocalypse. To understand the catastrophe the Sea Peoples unleashed, we need to travel back to the Late Bronze Age, around 1300 to 1200 BCE. This was the ancient world's golden age, a time when great empires stretched across the Mediterranean like a complex web of power and prosperity. In Egypt, the new kingdom pharaohs ruled with divine authority. Ramesses II had just finished his legendary reign, leaving behind monuments that still awe us today. To the north, the Hittite Empire controlled much of modern-day Turkey and Syria, their iron weapons giving them a technological edge that made them feared across the known world. The Mycenaean Greeks dominated the Aegean Sea, their palace cities like Pylos and Tiryns controlling vast trade networks. These weren't just warriors, they were sophisticated administrators who kept detailed records on clay tablets, tracking everything from livestock to luxury goods. But here's where it gets interesting and terrifying. Archaeological evidence shows that around 1200 BCE, this entire interconnected world began to collapse in a domino effect of destruction that would make the fall of Rome look like a minor inconvenience. But what could possibly bring down multiple empires simultaneously? The answer lies in the mysterious chronicles of Egyptian scribes who recorded encounters with invaders they called the Peoples of the Sea. The first clue comes from the walls of Medinet Habu, where Pharaoh Ramesses III carved a chilling account of his battles against these mysterious invaders. But here's what makes this absolutely fascinating. The Egyptians, who were meticulous record keepers, seem almost confused by what they're describing. The inscriptions read like something out of a disaster movie. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms. Think about that for a moment. The Egyptians, who had faced countless enemies and documented every military campaign in excruciating detail, are describing something they've never seen before. These weren't just raiders or invaders. They were something entirely different. The Egyptian records mention specific groups: the Peleset, the Tieka, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, and the Weshesh. But here's the mystery that has puzzled historians for decades. We have almost no other records of these peoples from any other source. It's as if they appeared out of nowhere, destroyed everything in their path, and then vanished back into the mists of history. But where did they really come from? Before we reveal the shocking theories about their origins, let me know in the comments, have you ever heard of the Sea Peoples before this video? And what do you think could make entire civilizations disappear? Your theories might be closer to the truth than you think. The archaeological evidence is absolutely staggering. Across the eastern Mediterranean, archaeologists have uncovered what they call destruction layers, thick bands of ash and debris that tell the story of systematic devastation. At Ugarit, one of the Bronze Age's greatest trading cities, excavations revealed a scene of utter chaos. Houses were burned, valuable items were left scattered as if people fled in panic, and cuneiform tablets were found still in the kiln where they were being baked when disaster struck. One tablet contains a desperate plea for help. "The enemy's ships came here. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country." But Ugarit wasn't alone. Troy, the legendary city of Homer's Iliad, shows evidence of violent destruction around this same period. Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, the great centers of Greek civilization, were all abandoned or destroyed. Even the mighty Hittite capital of Hattusa was burned and left empty. Here's what makes this truly mind-boggling. These destructions happened within a span of just 50 years, across thousands of miles of territory. We're talking about a coordinated collapse that affected civilizations from Greece to Syria to Cyprus. But here's the question that will keep you up at night. How could Bronze Age raiders accomplish what even massive armies had failed to do for centuries? The most detailed accounts of the Sea Peoples come from Egyptian sources, particularly from the reigns of Merneptah and Rameses III. These pharaohs didn't just fight the Sea Peoples. They documented their encounters with an almost obsessive attention to detail. Merneptah's account, carved around 1208 BCE, describes a confederation of peoples attacking Egypt's western border in alliance with the Libyans. But what's fascinating is how he describes their movement. They came from their islands and their mainland, their hearts confident and trusting. This isn't the language typically used for traditional enemies. The Egyptians are describing something unprecedented. Entire populations on the move, not just raiding parties. Rameses III's accounts, dating to around 1175 BCE, are even more dramatic. His scribes write, "As for the foreign countries, they made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms, from Hatti, Kode, Karshemish, Azawa, and Elashionne, being cut off at one time." Notice something crucial here. The Egyptians are saying that established kingdoms were cut off at one time. This suggests coordinated, simultaneous attacks across vast distances. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. The Egyptian reliefs show something unprecedented in ancient warfare. The Sea Peoples brought their families with them. Women, children, and elderly people are depicted in ox carts, suggesting this wasn't just a military campaign, it was a massive migration. What could force entire civilizations to abandon their homes and take to the sea? The answer might be more terrifying than invasion itself. But before we reveal what may have driven these mysterious peoples to destroy the ancient world, hit that like button if you're as fascinated by this mystery as I am. And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because we're about to explore theories that will completely change how you think about ancient history. So where did the Sea Peoples actually come from? Historians and archaeologists have proposed several mind-blowing theories, each more fascinating than the last. Theory 1. The climate catastrophe. Recent archaeological evidence suggests that the late Bronze Age ended with a severe climate crisis. Core samples from lakes and ice sheets show evidence of prolonged drought and cooling temperatures around 1200 BCE. Imagine entire regions becoming uninhabitable, forcing massive populations to abandon their homelands and seek new territory by any means necessary. This would explain why the Sea Peoples brought their families. They weren't planning to return home because there was no home to return to. They were climate refugees with bronze weapons and nothing to lose. Theory 2. The Trojan War connection. Some scholars believe the Sea Peoples were actually displaced Mycenaean Greeks. Think about it. The traditional date for the Trojan War is around 1184 BCE, right in the middle of the Sea Peoples' rampage. What if the legendary conflict described in Homer's Iliad was actually part of this larger collapse? Picture this scenario. The Mycenaean expedition to Troy succeeds but weakens the Greek kingdoms so severely that they become vulnerable to internal collapse. Displaced warriors, their homes destroyed, become sea-roving raiders seeking new lands to settle. Theory 3. The Anatolian displacement. The most compelling theory suggests the Sea Peoples originated from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, as the Hittite Empire collapsed. As central authority broke down, displaced populations from across the empire may have banded together as maritime raiders. This would explain their apparent organization and their knowledge of Bronze Age warfare tactics. They weren't barbarians. They were the remnants of collapsed civilizations fighting for survival. But here's the theory that might explain everything, and it's more terrifying than any invasion. The domino effect theory. What if the Sea Peoples weren't the cause of the Bronze Age collapse, but rather its most visible symptom? Modern historians are increasingly convinced that what we're seeing is history's first recorded example of systemic collapse, a domino effect that brought down the ancient world's interconnected economy. Here's how it might have worked. The Bronze Age civilizations were incredibly dependent on trade networks. Bronze itself required tin and copper from different regions, meaning even basic tools and weapons depended on international commerce. Palace economies controlled vast bureaucracies that managed everything from taxation to food distribution. Now imagine a scenario where climate change disrupts agriculture, causing food shortages. Kingdoms can't support their massive bureaucracies. Trade networks begin to fail as regions become unstable. Without bronze tools and weapons, societies can't maintain their military superiority. As each civilization weakens, it becomes vulnerable to attack, which further destabilizes the system. The Sea Peoples may have been groups of displaced refugees who became raiders out of necessity, creating a feedback loop of destruction that spiraled completely out of control. Think of it as the ancient world's first global economic collapse, complete with climate change, supply chain failures, and mass migration. Sound familiar? But not everyone was destroyed. Egypt survived, though weakened. Some regions adapted and evolved. The Philistines, who many scholars believe were part of the Sea Peoples Confederation, settled in what is now Gaza and established a lasting civilization. The Phoenicians emerged from the chaos to dominate Mediterranean trade for the next several centuries. In Greece, the collapse of the palace system eventually gave rise to the city-states that would produce classical Greek civilization. This raises a crucial question. Were the Sea Peoples actually destroyers, or were they unwitting catalysts for a new phase of human civilization? What do you think? Were the Sea Peoples villains or victims of circumstances beyond their control? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're loving this deep dive into ancient mysteries, you need to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got more incredible historical mysteries coming your way. The Sea Peoples crisis offers chilling parallels to modern global challenges. Climate change, economic interdependence, mass migration, and systemic collapse. These aren't just ancient problems. Consider how quickly our modern global supply chains can be disrupted, as we saw during recent pandemics and conflicts. The Bronze Age collapse reminds us that even the most sophisticated civilizations are vulnerable when multiple crises converge. The Sea Peoples story also highlights how environmental pressures can trigger massive population movements that destabilize entire regions. As climate change continues to affect global agriculture and coastal regions, we might see similar patterns of displacement and conflict. But there's one more shocking revelation about the Sea Peoples that most historians don't want to talk about. Here's what makes the Sea Peoples absolutely unique in ancient history. They seem to have deliberately destroyed records and administrative systems wherever they went. This wasn't just conquest, it was systematic erasure of bureaucratic civilization. Linear B tablets from Mycenaean palaces show that these were highly organized societies with complex administrative systems. Yet after the Sea Peoples passed through, these writing systems simply disappeared. It would be centuries before Greeks developed alphabetic writing again. This suggests the Sea Peoples may have been deliberately targeting the palace-based administrative systems that controlled Bronze Age society. Were they primitive barbarians, or were they conducting sophisticated psychological warfare designed to prevent their enemies from reorganizing? The truth is, we may never know for certain because the Sea Peoples were so effective at destroying the very records that could tell us who they really were. The Sea Peoples remain one of history's greatest mysteries, but their impact is undeniable. They marked the end of the Bronze Age and helped usher in a new era of human civilization. Whether they were climate refugees, displaced warriors, or something else entirely, they forever changed the course of Mediterranean history. What fascinates me most is how their story reminds us that even the mightiest civilizations can disappear almost overnight when faced with the perfect storm of challenges. If you enjoyed diving into this ancient mystery, you absolutely need to subscribe and turn on notifications. We're exploring more incredible historical puzzles that will blow your mind. And let me know in the comments, what ancient mystery should we investigate next? Hit that like button if the Sea Peoples story amazed you. Share this video with anyone who loves ancient history, and I'll see you in the next video where we uncover more secrets from humanity's forgotten past.